Yes, the cheapest one is $12,000, which means that a house of 100 square meters costs about $1 million. Even the smallest apartment house costs $50,000 or $60,000. You must listen carefully, sir. Natalie Xavier was very dismissive of this kind of person who was overconfident and maliciously delayed time. Well, Chuck Cannon didn't finish his words. At this time, a pot-bellied man walked into the real estate agency. The gold necklace on his neck was thicker than his fingers, and he looked like a rich man at first glance. Natalie immediately chose to leave Chuck aside and greeted the man with a smile. It was totally different from the way she treated Chuck. When Natalie saw the fat man, she immediately put on a happy smile. "Sir, do you want to buy a house?" "Yes, I want to buy a house. Introduce some high-quality housing sources to me." Natalie smiled even more happily. "Yes, yes. We have plenty of high-quality rooms here for you with our high-end service, unlike some people who come to us even when they can't afford it." "It's a waste of time." Natalie gave Chuck a disdainful look as she spoke, implying and cursing him. Chuck looked at Natalie's attitude and felt disheartened. He was used to being looked down upon. At that time, he didn't dare to say anything without money. But this time, he had $5 million. How could he swallow such humiliation? "Where's your manager? Call your manager over." Hearing Chuck's words, Natalie sneered and said, "Do people like you still have the right to meet our manager? Don't make a fool of yourself here. Get out of here. Do you know that wasting 1 minute of our time will affect how much money we make?" The manager walked over slowly at this time. As a service industry, it was a big taboo to be rude to guests. "What's going on, Natalie?" Natalie hurriedly explained, "Manager, this broke idiot isn't trying to buy a house, but instead he's enjoying the air conditioning here. I'll get him out of here immediately." The manager eyeballed Chuck's clothes from top to bottom and saw that he was dressed in ordinary clothes. Indeed, as Natalie said, he didn't look like someone who could afford to buy a house. More importantly, he was too young to buy a house, as he looked just 18 or 19 years old. No one would believe he had the ability to. Chuck did not say anything. He stood up and walked to the agency next door. "Can't afford a house? It seems that you are not the only real estate agency here." Natalie looked down on him. "How is a poor person like you able to buy a house? I think you can't even afford a toilet." Some employees also laughed at him. He's afraid of making a fool of himself, so he found an excuse to run away quickly. He said he wanted to go next door, but he could possibly just be trying to take advantage of the air conditioning there too. "Still pretending even when you're gone," Natalie sneered. They were familiar with the next door real estate agency, and they also knew whether they could sell it or not. After watching Chuck leave, Natalie hurriedly ran to the fatty and smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, boss. Sorry to keep you waiting." The fatty shook his head and said, "It's okay, it's okay." However, no matter how Natalie greeted him with a smile, the fatty never talked about money. In the end, Natalie's patience was exhausted and she even began to plead. At this moment, all the employees of the real estate agency looked outside. Under the respectful guidance of the staff next door, Chuck got into the Mercedes-Benz, which was specially used to look at the room. What was going on? Generally speaking, only people who bought a house could enter this car. Didn't the next door real estate agency see that this little rascal didn't have the ability to buy a house at all? The fatty saw that these people in the real estate agency were distracted, so he quickly sneaked out. Natalie turned around and looked at the customer who had disappeared. She was so angry that she stomped her feet. She didn't expect that the fatty, who was putting on airs and graces, was actually here just to enjoy the air conditioner. Natalie Xavier looked at Chuck and disliked him even more. She sneered and said, "Such a pretentious person, and even imitating others to inspect a house." At this time, an employee next door came quickly. He pushed the door open and said with a smile, "Thank you. You sent such an important customer to our company. We haven't run into any big business in the past 2 years. Today is a big day. Important customer." The manager's face darkened and he hurriedly asked, "What did he buy?" He bought a house worth more than $3 million with a deposit of $1 million. This business should be successful. Thank you. I'll treat you to a cup of milk tea later." After that, the employee got on the Mercedes-Benz and took Chuck to take a look at the house. "Really bought it?" Natalie's face was full of disbelief. Looking at Chuck, who was sitting in the Mercedes-Benz with a smile on his face, Natalie felt very uncomfortable. How could it be possible? He is so poor, how could he possibly afford to buy a house? Smack! Before she could blame herself, the manager raised his hand and slapped her in the face. His eyes were almost bursting out flames. "Look at what you have done. If the transaction is successful, the employees who have dealt with him will be given a 5% commission, which would be around $150,000. As for the manager, he would have gotten a 10% commission amounting to $300,000. But now the manager trembled with anger when he thought of the commission of $300,000 gone with the wind. He kicked Natalie again and said, "Get out. You're fired. Get out." Natalie was also losing her mind. Ignoring the pain on her body, she quickly got up from the ground and ran outside, then throwing herself whole at the BMW. She knocked on the window repeatedly and looked at Chuck, sobbing, Sir, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. I failed to recognize your wealth before and I'm a snob. Please give me another chance. We have better houses here." Chuck shook his head and said, "It's all right, you can save it for the other customers." After that, the Mercedes-Benz started up in a hurry. Natalie chased after him all the way and finally sat down on the ground. She looked weakly at the Mercedes-Benz getting farther and farther away. Thud! The manager threw Natalie's personal belongings out of the door and yelled at her, "Get out of here! Don't let me see you again!" Chuck Cannon was quite satisfied with the house. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and 2 bathrooms. Located in the downtown area, the business district was more prosperous and there was a lot of room for renovation. $3.5 million was paid in a lump sum graciously. The salesman had not seen such a rich man for a long time, and his face was full of admiration and envy. He then took the initiative to send Chuck back to university. When he arrived at the gate, Chuck nodded and said, "You can drop me off here." The salesman smiled respectfully and said, "All right, take your time, good sir. The process of transferring the house should be completed tomorrow. And you should be able to move in the day after tomorrow." "Okay." Chuck nodded and decided to stay at the nearest hotel for the time being for the next 2 days. However, he wanted to know more was what Yvette Jordan would feel if she saw that his house was 3 or 4 times bigger than hers. When they arrived at the gate, Chuck first took out $20,000 before strolling into the university. There were not many classes in the afternoon, but Chuck had already been absent for a whole class because he had been held up outside for a while. Seeing Chuck walking into the classroom, Laura Jean sneered, "Oh, who is this? Isn't this Chuck, the beggar of our class? I'm telling you, don't lend your money to such a person. When you lend him money, he acts as though you're his savior and bows to you. However, when you try to get the money back from him, he acts shamelessly like a scam trying to cheat off your money. Speaking of which, he hasn't even paid me back until now." "Oh? This guy doesn't have parents, who knows which B***** he learnt these tactics from?" The whole class burst into laughter.